At 11:58 p.m. on July 23, 1945, Commander Eugene Fluckey stood in the conning tower of USS Barb, 950 yards off the coast of Karafuto, watching 8 men paddle toward Japanese territory in 2 rubber boats. 31 years old, 5 war patrols as captain, 17 ships destroyed. The Japanese had moved 400 trains along this coastal railway in the past month, carrying ammunition and troops south to defend against American invasion. Fluckey lowered his binoculars. The Barb had been on patrol for 45 days. During that time, his crew had fired the first submarine-launched rockets in naval history, destroying factories at Shari and Shikuka. They had bombarded coastal installations with deck guns, they had sunk cargo ships and patrol boats. But tonight's mission was different. Tonight, 8 unmarried sailors were rowing toward the Japanese homeland, carrying a 55-pound bomb and 3 batteries wired to a microswitch. Their objective was a railroad track 1,500 feet inland. Their window of opportunity was 90 minutes before dawn. Their escape plan was to run. No American combat troops had ever landed on the Japanese home islands. These 8 men would be the first. The Pacific War had lasted 3 years and 8 months. American submarines had sunk more than 1,200 Japanese ships. But submarines fought underwater. They launched torpedoes at vessels miles away. They dove deep when destroyers hunted them with depth charges. They did not send landing parties ashore. Fluckey had earned the Medal of Honor 5 months earlier for attacking 30 ships anchored in Namquan Harbor off the Chinese coast. He had taken the Barb into waters so shallow that rocks scraped the hull. He had fired every torpedo aboard. He had escaped at 23.5 knots, setting a world speed record for submarines. The Navy had given him a choice after that patrol: retire as a hero, or take the Barb on one final mission. Fluckey chose the mission. His reasoning was simple. Japan was preparing for invasion. American intelligence estimated that assault would cost 1 million casualties. Anything that disrupted Japanese supply lines saved American lives. The problem was finding targets. By July 1945, Japanese merchant shipping had collapsed. Convoy routes were abandoned. Cargo vessels hid in harbors. Destroyers stayed in port, waiting for the invasion that seemed inevitable. Submarines like the Barb were running out of ships to sink. But trains ran every day. Fluckey had watched them through his periscope for weeks. Long freight trains crawling along the Karafuto coastline, loaded with artillery shells and infantry replacements. The railway connected Japan's northern defenses to the south. Destroy one train, and supplies stopped moving. Destroy the track itself, and repairs took weeks. The idea had come from Chief of the Boat Paul Saunders, a veteran of all 12 Barb patrols. He spread a topographic map across the wardroom table and traced the railway with his finger. Less than 2,000 feet from the beach. Visible from the submarine. Accessible at night. Fluckey called for volunteers. Every man aboard raised his hand. He selected 8 based on 2 criteria. They had to be unmarried, and they had to be Boy Scouts. Fluckey believed scouts had better navigation skills, better discipline under stress. The plan relied on improvisation. The bomb was a scuttling charge, designed to destroy the submarine in an emergency. Electrician's mate 3rd class Billy Hatfield had rewired it with a microswitch device he remembered from childhood. As a boy, he had placed walnuts on railroad tracks and watched trains crack them open. The principle was the same. When a train passed over the switch, the rail would sag slightly. The contact would complete the circuit. The bomb would detonate. Simple physics, catastrophic results. But the landing party needed time. Time to paddle ashore without being spotted by Japanese patrols. Time to cross 1,500 feet of open ground to the railway. Time to dig under the tracks and bury the device. Time to arm the microswitch. Time to run back to the boats before a patrol found them. And time to row back to the Barb before dawn exposed them on open water. Fluckey checked his watch. 12:03 a.m. The rubber boats had disappeared into darkness. If you want to see whether Hatfield's microswitch worked under a 16-car train, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten World War II stories. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Fluckey. He turned to his executive officer. The Barb would wait at periscope depth, engines running, ready to dive if patrol boats approached. If the landing party missed their extraction window, Flucky had given them final orders. Head north to Siberia, 130 miles through mountain ranges. Survive as long as possible. But Flucky had no intention of leaving 8 men behind. He had brought every sailor home from every patrol. The Barb had never lost a man to enemy action. Not one Purple Heart had been awarded to his crew in 5 patrols. He intended to keep that record. On the beach, 8 Americans were digging into Japanese soil. Lieutenant William Walker stepped onto Japanese sand at 12:07 a.m. Behind him, 7 sailors dragged 2 rubber boats up the beach and into the tree line. They worked in silence. No flashlights, no voices. Just the sound of boots on wet gravel and breathing. Walker was 24 years old. He had graduated from the Naval Academy 3 years earlier. This was his first war patrol, his first time ashore in enemy territory. His orders were simple. Plant the bomb, get back to the boats. Do not engage the enemy under any circumstances. The beach was narrower than expected. 30 feet of open sand, then a dense wall of pine trees. Beyond the trees, a drainage ditch. Beyond the ditch, a coastal road. Beyond the road, 1,500 feet of open ground leading to the railway. Billy Hatfield carried the bomb in a canvas bag. 55 pounds of explosives wired to 3 batteries and a micro switch. The device was crude but effective. The micro switch sat inside a pickle jar. When the train passed overhead, the rail would press down on the jar. The jar would compress the switch, the circuit would close, the batteries would send current to the detonator. Hatfield had tested the mechanism 3 times aboard the Barb. All 3 tests succeeded. But lab conditions were different from field conditions. Rain could short the circuit. Vibrations could trigger the switch prematurely. A Japanese patrol could spot them before the device was armed. The landing party moved through the trees in single file. Walker led. Hatfield followed with the bomb. 6 sailors spread out behind them, carrying shovels and wire cutters. They had studied aerial photographs of this section of coastline for 2 weeks. The railway ran parallel to the beach, roughly 2,000 feet inland. A dirt service road connected the tracks to the coastal highway. Japanese maintenance crews used that road to inspect the line every morning at dawn. Dawn was 90 minutes away. Walker checked his watch every 30 seconds. Time was the enemy now. Not Japanese soldiers, not patrol boats, just the rotation of the earth and the approach of daylight. They reached the drainage ditch at 12:15. The ditch was deeper than the photographs suggested. 6 feet deep, filled with 2 feet of water. Walker climbed down first. Cold water soaked through his boots. He crossed the ditch in 4 steps and pulled himself up the opposite bank. The coastal road was empty. No vehicles, no sentries, no lights from nearby buildings. The aerial photographs had shown a small fishing village half a mile south. Walker could see lights in that direction, faint yellow dots against the darkness, but the road itself was deserted. The landing party crossed in pairs. Walker waited until all 8 men were across, then signaled them forward. They moved low and fast, staying in the shadows near the tree line. The open ground between the road and the railway stretched ahead of them like a spotlight. This was the dangerous part. 1,500 feet of flat terrain with no cover. If a Japanese patrol spotted them, there was nowhere to hide. No trees, no buildings, just grass and rocks and moonlight. Walker made a decision. They would not cross as a group. Too visible. Too slow. Instead, they would split into 2 teams. Team 1 would cross first and secure the railway. Team 2 would wait at the tree line with the bomb. Once Team 1 signaled, Team 2 would cross with Hatfield. 3 sailors sprinted across the open ground. Walker watched them disappear into the darkness near the tracks. He counted to 60. No gunfire. No searchlights. No alarm. Team 1 had made it. Walker tapped Hatfield on the shoulder. They ran. The ground was rougher than it looked, rocks and divots hidden in tall grass. Hatfield stumbled twice but kept moving. The canvas bag bounced against his hip. Walker focused on the darkness ahead. Just keep running. Just reach the tracks. They covered 1,500 feet in 2 minutes. The railway was a single-track line running north to south along the coast. The rail sat on wooden ties embedded in gravel. Telegraph poles lined the eastern side of the track. The poles carried communication wires connecting coastal stations to inland command posts. Walker dropped to one knee beside the tracks. Hatfield set the bomb down and opened the canvas bag. The other sailors formed a perimeter, watching the approaches from north and south. No trains visible in either direction. No maintenance crews. No patrols. Hatfield pulled out the first shovel and began digging between two ties. The gravel was loose, easy to move. He cleared a space roughly 2 feet wide and 18 inches deep, big enough for the bomb, deep enough to hide the wiring. Another sailor joined him with a second shovel. They worked fast. Gravel flew. Sweat ran down their faces despite the cold night air. Walker kept checking his watch. 12:28, 12:31, 12:34. 56 minutes until dawn. Hatfield lowered the bomb into the hole. He positioned it carefully, making sure the detonator sat upright. Then he ran the wiring up through the gravel to the microswitch. The switch itself needed to rest directly under the rail. When the train passed over, the weight would compress the switch and complete the circuit. Simple in theory, deadly in practice. Hatfield placed the microswitch under the southern rail. He tested the positioning twice. The switch needed to sit flush against the bottom of the rail. Too much space, and the train would pass without triggering it. Too little space, and vibrations from an approaching train could set it off prematurely. He made his final adjustments at 12:41 a.m. The bomb was armed. Now they just needed a train. Walker gave the signal at 12:43 a.m. The landing party began covering their tracks. They smoothed the disturbed gravel with their hands. They scattered loose stones over the hole where the bomb sat buried. They brushed away footprints near the rails. The goal was invisibility. A Japanese maintenance crew inspecting the line at dawn should see nothing unusual. No disturbed earth, no exposed wiring, no signs that anyone had been near the tracks. Hatfield made one final check of the microswitch. The device rested snugly against the underside of the southern rail. The wiring ran from the switch down into the gravel hole where the bomb waited. Everything was in position. Everything was armed. They started back toward the beach at 12:47. The return trip felt longer, more exposed. The adrenaline that had carried them across the open ground was fading now, replaced by exhaustion and mounting tension. Every shadow looked like a sentry. Every sound suggested an approaching patrol. Walker kept the team moving fast. They crossed the 1,500 feet of open ground in 3 minutes. They reached the tree line without incident. They crossed the coastal road in pairs again, checking both directions before moving. Still no Japanese patrols. Still no vehicles on the road. Still no sign they had been detected. But dawn was coming. The eastern horizon was beginning to lighten. Not sunrise yet, just the first hint of gray creeping into the black sky. They had maybe 40 minutes before full daylight. The landing party reached the drainage ditch at 12:56. They crossed quickly, one man at a time. Cold water again, muddy banks. Then back into the pine trees moving toward the beach. Walker could see the ocean now through the trees. Dark water reflecting moonlight. And somewhere out there, 950 yards offshore, the barb waited at periscope depth. They reached the beach at 1:03 a.m. The 2 rubber boats sat hidden in the tree line where they had left them. The sailors dragged the boats down to the water's edge. Walker scanned the beach in both directions. Empty. No fishermen, no patrol boats, no searchlight sweeping the coastline. They pushed the boats into the surf at 1:05. 4 men per boat, paddles dipping into black water, pulling hard. The boats moved slowly at first, fighting the incoming tide. Then they cleared the surf line, and the paddling became easier, smoother, faster. Walker looked back at the beach. Already it was fading into darkness behind them. In a few hours, Japanese civilians would wake up in the fishing village. They would go about their morning routines. They would have no idea that 8 Americans had been ashore during the night. The boats reached the barb at 1:18 a.m. Hands reached down from the submarine's deck to pull the sailors aboard. The rubber boats were deflated and stowed. The deck crew helped the landing party down through the forward hatch. Flucky was waiting in the control room. He checked his watch. 1:21 a.m. The landing party had been ashore for 71 minutes. Ahead of schedule. No injuries, no contact with enemy forces. The mission was proceeding exactly as planned. But the bomb had not detonated yet. Flucky ordered the barb to remain at periscope depth. They would wait offshore and monitor the railway. If a train triggered the device, they would hear the explosion from 2,000 yards away. If no train came, they would surface at dawn and abort the mission. The waiting began. 1:30 a.m. No explosion. 1:45 a.m. Still nothing. 2 a.m. Silence. The crew stood at their stations, listening. The control room was quiet except for the hum of electric motors and the occasional ping of the sonar. Every man aboard knew what was happening. 8 sailors had planted a bomb on a Japanese railway. Now they were waiting to see if a train would hit it. Fluky stood at the periscope, watching the coastline. He could see lights from the fishing village. He could see the dark line of the railway running parallel to the beach. But he could not see the bomb, could not see the microswitch, could not see whether the device was still armed or whether something had gone wrong. Submarine warfare was a game of patience. Hours of boredom interrupted by minutes of terror. Fluky had spent 5 patrols learning that lesson. He had learned to wait, to trust his crew, to trust his equipment, to trust the plan. But this was different. This time, the barb was not hunting. The barb was waiting. Waiting for a train. Waiting for a Japanese locomotive engineer to follow his scheduled route. Waiting for 55 pounds of explosives to do what they were designed to do. 2:15 a.m. The eastern sky was definitely lighter now. Not dawn yet, but close, maybe 20 minutes away. 2:25 a.m. Still no train. 2:32 a.m. Fluky was about to order the barb to withdraw when the sonar operator reported a contact. Surface contact. Moving south along the coast. Speed approximately 30 miles per hour. It was not a ship. The radar confirmed it. The contact was on land. Following the railway. Moving steadily toward the position where the bomb waited. It was a train. Fluky pressed his eye to the periscope eyepiece and waited. The train appeared as a dark silhouette against the lightening sky. Fluky could see it through the periscope. A single locomotive pulling freight cars south along the coastal railway. The engineer was maintaining speed, roughly 30 miles per hour. Standard pace for a supply train on this route. 2:37 a.m. The train was 4 miles north of the bomb. 2:40 a.m. 3 miles. 2:42 a.m. 2 miles. The control room was silent except for mechanical sounds. Motors humming. Sonar pinging. Men breathing. Every sailor aboard the barb was thinking the same thing. Would the microswitch work? Would the train trigger it? Or would the device fail and leave 55 pounds of American explosives buried under a Japanese railway? Fluky kept his eye pressed to the periscope. He could see the locomotive now. Black smoke trailing from the stack. Headlight cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. The train was moving steadily. No signs of slowing. No indication the engineer suspected anything unusual. 2:45 a.m. 1 mile from the bomb. The sonar operator counted down the distance based on the train's speed and position. Half a mile. Quarter mile. The train was approaching the exact section of track where Hatfield had buried the device. Fluky held his breath. At 2:47 a.m., the eastern sky turned white. The explosion lit up the coastline like a magnesium flare. A column of flame shot upward from the railway, climbing 200 feet into the air. The locomotive's boiler detonated. Superheated steam and burning coal erupted in all directions. The explosion was so bright that Flucky had to pull back from the periscope for a moment. When he looked again, debris was still falling. The locomotive had disintegrated. The front half was simply gone, vaporized by the combined force of the bomb and the boiler explosion. The rear section of the engine tumbled forward, driven by momentum, and plowed into the wreckage ahead of it. The freight cars followed in sequence. Car 1 crashed into the destroyed locomotive and accordion folded. Car 2 climbed up and over Car 1, then rolled sideways off the tracks. Car 3 hit Car 2 and flipped completely over. Cars 4 through 8 piled into the growing mass of twisted metal. Cars 9 through 16 derailed in succession, each one adding to the chaos. The entire train came apart in less than 10 seconds. A mushroom cloud of smoke rose above the wreckage, black smoke mixing with white steam, flames spreading through the wreckage as cargo caught fire. The explosion had thrown locomotive parts across a 200-foot radius, pieces of steel plating, sections of wheel assembly, fragments of the boiler. Flucky watched through the periscope as the smoke cloud expanded. He could see fires burning in multiple locations along the derailment site. The train had been carrying ammunition. Secondary explosions rippled through the wreckage as shells cooked off in the heat. The sound reached the barb 8 seconds after the flash, a deep, rumbling boom that resonated through the submarine's hull, then a series of smaller explosions as the ammunition continued to detonate. The crew felt the shockwave through the water, not strong enough to damage the submarine, but strong enough to confirm what they had just witnessed. Billy Hatfield's microswitch had worked exactly as designed. 55 pounds of explosives had destroyed a 16-car Japanese supply train. The locomotive was scrap metal. The freight cars were kindling. The railway itself was buried under tons of wreckage. Japanese repair crews would need weeks to clear the debris and rebuild the damaged section of track. And the barb's landing party had done it with a pickle jar and 3 batteries. Flucky continued watching through the periscope. He could see lights coming on in the fishing village to the south, Japanese civilians emerging from their homes, looking north toward the explosion, pointing at the smoke and flames. Within minutes, emergency crews would arrive. Fire brigades, military police, railway officials. They would find the wreckage. They would count the dead. They would begin asking questions about how an entire train had exploded on a supposedly secure railway line. But they would not find evidence of the bomb. The explosion had destroyed the device completely. The microswitch was vaporized. The wiring was scattered across 200 feet of debris. The pickle jar was glass fragments buried in gravel. All they would find was a crater under the tracks and a destroyed train. The Japanese would assume it was a boiler explosion, a mechanical failure, poor maintenance, bad coal. Any explanation except the truth, that 8 American sailors had walked onto Japanese soil, planted a bomb, and walked away. Fluky stepped back from the periscope and turned to his executive officer. Time to leave. Japanese patrol boats would be scrambling from the naval base at Otomari. Search aircraft would launch at dawn. The barb needed to be gone before either arrived. But first, one detail remained. Every man who had been part of the landing party would receive recognition. Fluky would see to that personally. Letters of commendation, service medals, official documentation of their achievement. The Navy needed to know what these 8 sailors had accomplished. Future submarine commanders needed to study this operation. Future landing parties needed to learn from this success, because this was not just a destroyed train. This was proof that submarines could operate beyond their traditional role. They could launch rockets at shore targets. They could send commando teams inland. They could strike at enemy infrastructure in ways the Navy had never considered possible. The barb had just rewritten the rules of submarine warfare. Fluky gave the order to dive. The periscope retracted. The barb's bow tilted downward. Within 90 seconds, the submarine had disappeared beneath the surface, heading east toward deeper water. Behind them, the train continued to burn. The barb spent the next 3 days patrolling the waters east of Karafudo. Flucky kept the submarine submerged during daylight hours, surfacing only at night to recharge batteries and monitor radio traffic. Japanese search aircraft were active in the area. Patrol boats swept the coastline. But they were searching for evidence of sabotage, not submarines. The Japanese had not connected the train explosion to American naval activity. Radio intercepts confirmed this. Japanese military communications described the incident as a catastrophic boiler failure. Railway officials were blaming poor maintenance. The Imperial Army was demanding an investigation into coal quality. Nobody was talking about bombs or landing parties or American submarines. The Barb's mission had succeeded beyond expectations. On July 26th, Flucky made the decision to end the patrol. The submarine had been at sea for 48 days. Fuel reserves were running low. Food supplies were adequate but not abundant. The crew was exhausted. And most importantly, they had accomplished everything they had set out to do. The rocket attacks on Shari, Shikuka, and Kashiho had destroyed multiple factories. The shore bombardments had demolished coastal installations. The train explosion had disrupted the Karafudo Railway for weeks. The Barb had proven that submarines could strike land targets effectively without torpedoes. Flucky set course for Midway Island. The voyage took 6 days. The Barb traveled submerged during the day and surfaced at night. Standard procedure for submarines returning from patrol in enemy waters. Japanese patrol aircraft remained active until the submarine crossed into international waters east of the Kuril Islands. On August 2, 1945, the Barb surfaced 5 miles east of Midway and signaled the harbor control tower. Permission to enter port was granted immediately. The submarine proceeded into the lagoon at 10 knots, following the harbor pilot's instructions. The entire crew was on deck as the Barb approached the dock. They had been underwater for most of the past week. Fresh air and sunlight felt like luxuries after weeks in the cramped interior of a Gado-class submarine. Flucky stood on the bridge, watching the dock approach. A small crowd had gathered to meet them. Officers from Submarine Squadron 50, administrative staff from the base, and several photographers with cameras. Word had spread about the train. The Barb tied up at Pier 7 at 2:30 p.m. Gangplanks were extended. The crew began disembarking in groups. Shore patrol personnel checked identification and directed the sailors toward the debriefing area. The 8 men who had been part of the landing party were immediately separated from the rest of the crew. They were escorted to a secure conference room where intelligence officers were waiting. Standard protocol for special operations. Detailed debriefing would take hours. Every aspect of the mission would be documented. Every decision would be analyzed. Every risk would be evaluated. The Navy wanted to know if this type of operation could be repeated. Flucky spent 4 hours in his own debriefing. He explained the planning process, the volunteer selection criteria, the improvised bomb design, the timing of the insertion and extraction, the explosion itself, the escape route. The intelligence officers took notes and asked questions. How close had Japanese patrols come to detecting the landing party? How difficult was the terrain between the beach and the railway? How long did it take to arm the device? How visible was the submarine from shore at 950 yards? Flucky answered every question. He provided detailed information about coastal defenses. He described the layout of the fishing village. He estimated Japanese response times after the explosion. He recommended improvements for future operations. The debriefers were particularly interested in the microswitch design. Billy Hatfield was brought into the conference room to explain the device. He drew diagrams showing the wiring configuration. He described how the pickle jar housed the switch. He explained why the pressure from a train would compress the jar and close the circuit. The Navy wanted to know if other submarine crews could replicate this technology. Hatfield confirmed they could. The components were simple. Scuttling charges were standard equipment on all submarines. Batteries were abundant. Microswitches could be obtained through supply channels. The only requirement was someone with electrical knowledge to wire it correctly. The debriefing ended at 6:45 p.m. Flucky and the landing party were released with orders to report back the following morning for additional questioning. They walked out of the conference room into the warm midway evening. A crowd of sailors had gathered outside the building. Word had spread through the base about what the Barb had accomplished. Men from other submarines, support personnel, base staff, they wanted to see the crew that had blown up a train. The landing party was exhausted. They had been awake for more than 20 hours. They had paddled 2 miles in rubber boats. They had planted a bomb under a Japanese railway. They had witnessed the largest explosion any of them had ever seen. And they had spent 4 hours answering questions in a windowless conference room. But they were also aware that something significant had happened. They had done something no other submarine crew had ever done. They had landed on enemy territory. They had completed their mission. They had returned without casualties. And they had proven that submarines could operate far beyond their traditional role as torpedo platforms. The Barb's battle flag would soon reflect that achievement. At the bottom center of the flag, between the symbols for ships sunk and rocket attacks launched, the crew would add a new image: a locomotive. The only train ever destroyed by a submarine in naval history. The awards ceremony took place 6 weeks later at Pearl Harbor. By that time, the war had ended. Japan had surrendered on August 15th following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Pacific Fleet was beginning to demobilize. Thousands of sailors were preparing to return home. But the Navy still had business to complete. On September 18, 1945, Commander Eugene Fluckey received his 4th Navy Cross. The citation specifically mentioned the 12th War Patrol, the rocket attacks, the shore bombardments, and the train demolition. The Navy Cross was the second highest military decoration for valor. Only the Medal of Honor ranked higher. Fluckey already had that medal. He had received the Medal of Honor in March 1945 for the 11th War Patrol. That patrol had taken place from December 19, 1944 through February 15, 1945. The Barb had operated in the Formosa Strait and East China Sea. The mission was to disrupt Japanese shipping along the Chinese coast. On January 8th, the Barb encountered convoy MOTA-30, 9 cargo ships, multiple escorts. Fluckey attacked at night on the surface. The Barb sank 1 large ammunition ship. The explosion lit up the entire convoy. Japanese escorts responded with gunfire and depth charges. The Barb escaped by running on the surface at high speed. Then came Nam Quan Harbor, January 25, 1945. Fluckey discovered more than 30 Japanese ships anchored in the harbor. The harbor was located along the Chinese coast, roughly 26 miles inside the 20-fathom curve. Standard submarine doctrine said to stay in deep water. Deep water meant safety. Deep water meant escape routes if destroyers attacked. Nam Quan Harbor had 5 fathoms of water, roughly 30 feet deep, barely enough for the Barb to operate submerged. The bottom was uncharted. Rocks and reefs could tear open the hull. Mines could be anywhere, and once inside the harbor, the only way out was back through the narrow entrance channel. Fluckey decided to attack anyway. The Barb entered Nam Quan Harbor after midnight. Fluckey navigated by periscope, watching the depth gauge constantly. The submarine moved at 5 knots, slow enough to avoid creating a visible wake, fast enough to maintain steering control. At 3,000 yards range, Fluckey fired the Barb's last forward torpedoes. 8 fish, 8 targets. The torpedoes ran hot and straight. 6 hits. 3 ships exploded immediately. The ammunition ship detonated with such force that flaming debris rained down across the harbor. Shells from the cargo exploded in midair. Other ships caught fire. The Japanese escorts scrambled to respond, but could not identify where the attack was coming from. Fluckey brought the Barb around to use the stern tubes. 4 more torpedoes. 2 more hits. By the time Japanese destroyers began searching for the submarine, the Barb was already racing toward the harbor entrance. The escape took 1 hour. 1 hour of full speed through uncharted, mined, rock-obstructed waters. The Barb ran on the surface, engines at 150% capacity, 23.5 knots, a world record for submarines at that time. Destroyers pursued but could not keep up. Shore batteries opened fire, but the Barb was moving too fast for accurate targeting. The submarine reached open water at dawn. Behind them, Nam Quan Harbor was burning. 8 ships had been hit. 6 were sinking or sunk. Japanese repair crews would spend weeks clearing the wreckage. That action earned Fluky the Medal of Honor. The citation praised his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. President Harry Truman presented the medal at the White House in March. Fluky accepted the award on behalf of his entire crew. But the Medal of Honor did not end his career as a submarine commander. The Navy gave him a choice: accept the desk assignment or take the Barb on one more patrol. Fluky chose the patrol. His reasoning was the same as before. The war was still being fought. American lives were still at risk. Submarines could still make a difference. And the Barb was ready for another mission. That decision led to the 12th Patrol, the rocket attacks, the train demolition, the only American ground combat operation on Japanese home islands during the entire war. Now, in September 1945, Fluky stood at attention as Admiral Chester Nimitz pinned the 4th Navy Cross to his uniform. The ceremony was brief. No speeches, no photographs for the press, just a simple presentation in front of assembled naval officers at Pearl Harbor. Afterward, Nimitz asked Fluky about his plans. The war was over. The submarine fleet was being reduced. Many commanders would be reassigned to administrative positions or released from active duty. Fluky said he intended to stay in the Navy. Submarine warfare had changed during the war. Torpedoes were no longer the only weapon. Submarines could carry rockets. They could send landing parties ashore. They could operate in shallow coastal waters previously considered too dangerous. The future of submarine warfare was just beginning. Nimitz agreed. The Navy would need experienced commanders to develop new tactics, to train new crews, to push the boundaries of what submarines could accomplish. Fluky would get his chance. Eugene Fluky remained in the Navy for 27 more years after the war ended. He commanded the submarine USS Halfbeak from 1947 to 1949. He established the Submarine Naval Reserve Force in 1949. He served as Flag Secretary to Admiral James Fife Jr. in 1950. He commanded Submarine Division 12. He commanded the submarine tender USS Sperry. He commanded Submarine Squadron 5. In 1960, Fluky was promoted to Rear Admiral. He served as commander of Amphibious Group 4. He became president of the Board of Inspection and Survey. From 1966 to 1968, he served as Director of Naval Intelligence. His final assignment was as Chief of the Military Advisory Group to Portugal, where he served from 1969 until his retirement in August 1972. 37 years of active duty. 5 war patrols as a submarine commander. 1 Medal of Honor. 4 Navy Crosses. 2 Silver Stars. The Legion of Merit. The Bronze Star. Presidential Unit Citations. Navy Unit Commendations. And a record that would stand for decades. The USS Barb was officially credited with sinking 17 enemy vessels totaling 96,628 tons during World War II. That total included the Japanese aircraft carrier Unyo, sunk on September 17, 1944. The Barb ranked 4th among all American submarines for total tonnage destroyed. Only USS Flasher, USS Rasher, and USS Tang had higher totals. But the Barb's achievement went beyond numbers. The submarine had pioneered new tactics that changed how the Navy thought about submarine warfare. Surface attacks at night, shallow water harbor raids, rocket bombardments of shore targets, and commando operations on enemy territory. Each of these tactics had been considered too risky before Fluky demonstrated they could work. Other submarine commanders began adopting these methods. By late 1945, several submarines were equipped with rocket launchers. Plans were being developed for more landing operations on Japanese coastal positions. The atomic bombs ended the war before those plans could be implemented, but the groundwork had been laid. The Cold War would see submarines evolve even further. Nuclear power, ballistic missiles, guided cruise missiles. All of these developments built on the foundation that submarines like the Barb had established. Submarines were no longer just torpedo platforms. They were strategic weapons capable of projecting power far inland. The 8 sailors who had been part of the landing party returned to civilian life after the war. Most of them never spoke publicly about what they had done. The mission remained classified for several years. By the time the details were declassified, the men had moved on with their lives. They had families, careers. responsibilities that had nothing to do with planting bombs on Japanese railways. Billy Hatfield, the electrician who had designed the microswitch, returned to his home state and worked as an electrical contractor for 40 years. He rarely mentioned his Navy service. When asked about the war, he would say he had served on submarines, nothing more. The train explosion was just one night among many nights spent at sea. Paul Saunders, the chief of the boat who had suggested the train operation, stayed in the Navy for another decade. He served on multiple submarines during the late 1940s and early 1950s. He retired as a chief petty officer in 1955. His service record listed dozens of war patrols, hundreds of days spent underwater, but the Barb remained his most memorable assignment. Lieutenant William Walker, who had led the landing party ashore, left the Navy in 1946. He attended law school under the GI Bill. He practiced law in California for 30 years. He occasionally attended submarine reunions where veterans gathered to remember their wartime service. But he spoke little about the night he and 7 other men rowed to a Japanese beach and planted a bomb under a railway track. The USS Barb herself had a longer career than most of her crew expected. After the war ended, the submarine was decommissioned and placed in reserve. In 1954, she was transferred to the Italian Navy as part of the Mutual Defense Assistance Program. The Italians renamed her Enrico Tozzoli. She served the Italian Navy for 18 years. In 1972, the submarine was sold for scrap. The price was approximately $100,000. Admiral Fluckey later said that if the crew had known the Barb was being scrapped, they would have bought her themselves and brought her back to the United States as a museum ship. The Barb's battle flag survived. It is now displayed at the Submarine Force Library and Museum in Groton, Connecticut. The flag shows the symbols of 17 ships sunk, multiple rocket attacks, shore bombardments, and at the bottom center, a locomotive. Visitors to the museum can see the flag and learn the story behind that unusual symbol. In 2020, the Secretary of the Navy announced that a future Virginia-class submarine would be named USS Barb. The new submarine, designated SSN 804, will carry on the legacy of the original. The name will remind future generations of sailors what one submarine and one determined crew accomplished during 12 war patrols in the Pacific. But the most remarkable statistic about the USS Barb had nothing to do with ships sunk or tonnage destroyed. In 5 war patrols under Eugene Fluckey's command, the Barb suffered 0 casualties. Not one man wounded in combat. Not one man lost to enemy action. Not a single Purple Heart awarded to any crew member during Fluckey's command. This was not luck. This was leadership. Fluckey believed that aggressive tactics saved lives. Submarines that waited passively for targets put themselves at risk. Submarines that attacked decisively and retreated quickly survived. The Barb proved that theory across 5 war patrols and 48 combat actions. The crew trusted Fluckey because he made calculated decisions. He studied intelligence reports. He analyzed enemy patrol patterns. He planned escape routes before launching attacks. And he never asked his men to take risks he would not take himself. That trust created an environment where innovation thrived. Billy Hatfield felt comfortable suggesting a microswitch design based on childhood memories. Paul Saunders felt empowered to propose landing parties on enemy beaches. The entire crew volunteered for dangerous missions because they believed their commander would bring them home. And he did. Every single time. The legacy of the USS Barb extends beyond the ship sunk and the train destroyed. The submarine demonstrated that small crews with limited resources could accomplish extraordinary things when properly led and properly motivated. The 8-man landing party that went ashore at Karafuto was not composed of elite special forces. They were ordinary sailors, electricians, torpedo men, engine room personnel. Men who volunteered because they wanted to contribute to something larger than themselves. That spirit defined the submarine service during World War II. More than 50 American submarines were lost during the war. 3,500 submariners died in combat. The casualty rate among submarine crews was the highest of any branch of the American military. Roughly 22% of submariners who went to sea never came home. But those who did come home had changed the course of the war. American submarines sank more than 1,200 Japanese merchant ships. They destroyed 30% of Japan's navy. They disrupted supply lines across the entire Pacific. They forced Japan to divert destroyers and aircraft to anti-submarine patrols instead of offensive operations. The USS Barb's contribution to that effort was significant but not unique. Dozens of other submarines conducted equally dangerous patrols. Hundreds of other submarine commanders made equally bold decisions. Thousands of other submariners served with equal dedication. What made the Barb memorable was the train. That single operation captured the imagination of the Navy and the American public. A submarine that planted a bomb and destroyed a locomotive became a symbol of American ingenuity and determination. The story was told and retold. It appeared in newspaper articles. It was included in Navy training materials. It became part of submarine service legend. Eugene Fluckey understood the symbolic value of that achievement. He made sure the landing party received proper recognition. He documented every detail of the operation for future commanders to study. He advocated for new tactics and new equipment that would allow submarines to operate even more effectively. And he spent the rest of his career pushing the boundaries of what submarines could accomplish. Fluckey died on June 28, 2007, at the age of 93. He was buried at the United States Naval Academy Cemetery in Annapolis, Maryland. His gravestone lists his rank, his service dates, and his decorations. But it does not mention the train. It does not need to. Everyone who served in submarines knows the story. The USS Barb's 12th War Patrol lasted 55 days. The submarine traveled more than 10,000 miles. The crew fired 72 rockets at Japanese shore targets. They sank multiple patrol boats and cargo vessels. They bombarded coastal installations. And they sent 8 men ashore to plant a bomb under a railway track. That bomb detonated at 2:47 a.m. on July 23, 1945. The explosion destroyed 16 railroad cars and killed approximately 150 Japanese soldiers and railway workers. The damage to the track disrupted Japanese supply operations for 3 weeks. The psychological impact lasted much longer. Japan surrendered 3 weeks after the train explosion. The atomic bombs were the immediate cause, but the cumulative effect of 3 years of submarine warfare had already crippled Japan's ability to continue fighting. Ships could not move supplies. Factories could not obtain raw materials. Troops could not receive reinforcements. The submarine blockade had slowly strangled the Japanese war effort. The USS Barb was one small part of that larger campaign, but on one night in July 1945, 8 American sailors did something no one had done before. They landed on Japanese territory. They planted a bomb. They destroyed a train. And they came home. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people who need to hear it. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about submariners and sailors who saved lives with rockets, improvised bombs, and incredible courage. Real people, real heroism that deserves to be remembered. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States? United Kingdom? Canada? Australia? Somewhere else? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served in World War II. We would love to hear their stories. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching. And thank you for making sure Eugene Fluckey and these 8 sailors don't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.